I interviewed a number of high school students not too long ago, and one young man has shared some words of wisdom with me. He said, when I see a large group of people approaching me, I run away. So here I am, and there you are, a large group of people. I'm not going to run away, but once again, it is such an honor to be here and to talk to all of you about something that I have been thinking about for a while, and that is the evidence-based practice. A bit about me, if you hear an accent, it's not from Eugene, Oregon, where I live now. It's from Russia, so I'm originally from Russia. And the other piece of information you might want to know about me is that sometimes I stutter, and if you hear that, that's what it is. And if you'd like to have a conversation about it afterwards, just buy me a glass of wine. So, I would like to start with saying that I'm truly humbled to be here in front of all of you, because all of you have expertise in areas that far surpasses my own. And so what I would like to do here today is not to stand in front of you and to tell you what I think this is and how you should think about it, but rather for myself to enter into a space of being open and vulnerable and to start a conversation about truths that up to this point to me seem to be pretty self-evident, right? And a keynote or a speech is really not a dialogue, right? So here I am, I'll be talking to you, but I'm really hoping that this is going to start a conversation that might feel maybe a little uncomfortable for some, but really inspiring overall. So who am I? I'm gonna get my clicker, be all fancy. Who am I? I am a practitioner. I am a researcher. I am a teacher and a supervisor. As a practitioner, I work with my clients and help them achieve the lives that are valued and valuable. As a researcher, I cook stuff up to help practitioners out. And as a teacher and a supervisor, I create an environment in which my students and trainees can achieve their own professional goals and personal goals. I wear many hats and none of them comfortably. A community psychologist, Isaac Proletansky, once said, psychologists must engage in enunciation, the process of conceiving and refining our emerging conceptions of the good and the right. Unless psychologists share with others their implicit or explicit moral views, meaningful dialogue cannot thrive. This is why I'm not comfortable in any or all of my roles. Because in each of them, I have to engage in action, and that action can be impotent or destructive if it is not accompanied by a reflection of why, when, how, and why again. During an undergraduate graduation, a faculty member introduced me by saying, there isn't that much of a difference between Anya and a 3-year-old, because both have no problems asking why incessantly. I'm proud to say that this still holds true. I was raised in the Soviet Union by parents who did not allow me to get away with making broad stroke statements. So many a time I would come home from school and I would say something like, religion is the opium of the people. And my parents would say, why? And I would say, well, they said in school. And my parents would say, well, who are they? And they'd be like, the teachers. And my parents would say, and how do you know that they are right? This ongoing questioning of authority has gotten me into trouble many a time. One stands out in particular when in 2nd grade I had to do a project on a national hero. My mom and dad have convinced me that I have to do my project on a man who at one point in time was indeed a national hero, and then was demoted to the enemy of the people. So I don't think that I can describe the reaction of my staunch communist teacher as little Anya stood in front of the class and talked about the enemy of the people as a national hero. I chose the theme of Alice in Wonderland because to me, no matter who you are, what you do, where you come from, as soon as you start to question the basic underlying assumptions of anything, then nothing is what it really seems. So we're here today to talk about evidence-based practices. So what are they? To me, it's a conversation. Practitioners are out in the field. All of you are out in the field, and you are trying to help other people. And sometimes you come across a situation that seems to be not quite working out as you would like it to be. So then you come to the researchers and you say, hey, this is going on, can you help us out here? They cook something up, they report back, you try it out, you report back, right? It's a conversation, it's a dialogue. And why are we doing it? Because we want to understand what does it mean to be human. To me, the point of evidence-based practice is to understand what does it mean to be human in this world. And human existence is not the same every day. In fact, if we were lucky this morning, we all knew who we were, and we have changed several times since then. So to me, then, the question is, if human existence, if human world and stories are not the same, and we are trying to understand them, then are the methodologies that we are using, are they appropriate for that? And when I think about the evidence-based practice, I think of empirical studies. When I think of empirical studies, I think of research. When I think of research, I think of statistical significance, effect sizes, moderation effects. Why? Because in my program, this is what we do. In my program, where I come from, statistics is the queen, right? And in fact, I would say that if you go online and you look up any article in psychology, a lot of them are going to be using statistically based methodology. Why? I blame it on Karl Popper, who in the beginning of the last century offered a critique of inductive reasoning. What is inductive reasoning? Well, I'll give you an example. So we can say that most all of the biological life forms that we know of need water to survive. Anya needs water to survive. Anya is most certainly a biological life form and knows that almost certainly there is some room to sneak out the back door if in fact you do find out that I'm not a biological life form. You can say, well, I never really said she was. I kind of thought so, but whew, that's strange. Right? All in all, there's a probability that we know that something is true, and that is based on our experiences in the past and our understanding of what has happened to us in the past. Now, let's say that in fact you do find out that I am not a biological life form. Besides being scandalized, your understanding of what a biological life form is will change, and so the acquisition of knowledge goes on. That sounds pretty good, except at some point we start to look for evidence that is going to support what we already know, instead of trying to find the evidence that is going to prove us to be wrong. That doesn't make any sense. Well, why would we do that, right? Why would we try to prove ourselves wrong? And this is where Karl comes in. And Karl Popper said, if in any science, if in any science we really want to understand what it means to be in this world, then our hypotheses need to be subjected to the most stringent of tests. And in fact, our hypotheses need to be bold and daring, and thus highly falsifiable. To him, the project of acquisition of knowledge and understanding of the world was not that of self-indulgence and complacency. It was that of conjecture and critique. And since his time, the stringent test that he talks about has gotten more and more complex, right? We went from correlations to univariate regressions to multivariate regressions to structural equation modeling, right? It's getting more and more complex. Why? This increasing complexity of the test is reflective of the increased concern with, can we capture the essence of human existence and human stories and narrative and experience into a number? Now, if you are a fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you will say that yes, you can, because the answer to life, the universe, and everything is what? 42. 42, you got it. Now, social scientists believe that that also can be true, although the answer will not always be 42. Now, how does that work in the real world? Let's see. So one thing that you need to know about me is that I love wine. Red or white, chilled or mild, I love to have a glass at the end of a long day, and we'll be having one at the end of the day. So every once in a while, I find myself in a moment of this existential questioning, probably as I'm drinking wine. And it's about, so what does it mean about me that I drink alcohol? And what is this amazing thing? What is it doing to my body? Right? So I look to studies. I look to research. What I find out is that people who drink wine have higher IQs, higher parental education level, and higher socioeconomic status. I am so happy with my intellectually powered privilege in this world. All right. Well, except that this same study offered some other information. And so the other thing that you must know about me is that I also like to drink beer. Right? In fact, sometimes I go through long stretches in my life when I only drink beer and no wine. Well, that's a downer, because in that study, those who drank beer have lower IQ, lower parental education level, and low socioeconomic status. This is confusing to me. So does it mean that when I drink wine, I'm smarter? When I drink beer, I'm dumber? What does it mean about what does it mean about my experience as having come from a middle-class family with mom and dad who have postgraduate degrees and IQ somewhere close to the average? What does it mean about my experience? And what would it mean for a healthcare professional, for example, to use the study to make assumptions about who I am? I know that none of you would do that here, but if somebody were to do it, they would be wrong on all accounts, right? So let's say that this study is a fluke. Let's just go ahead and set it aside, and I still want to know what is the story with alcohol and how it affects me. Well, the good news is that there's so many studies out there that say that alcohol in moderation is wonderful for you. It's good for cardiovascular health, cancer, it makes your skin glow, right? So I feel pretty good about that, except I came across a study from just a couple months ago that said, you know, all this evidence is there, but let's look at how the evidence has come about, and is it accurate? And the authors of the study said, well, wouldn't it be interesting if the non-drinkers in those studies actually were people who drank quite a bit, experienced some negative health outcomes, quit drinking, and now they're the non-drinkers. And so you're comparing people who are drinking in moderation to people who stop drinking because you're experiencing really bad health outcomes. Well, we cannot make any conclusions about alcohol just based on that. What else is happening for the people who drink in moderation? Is it that they exercise? Maybe they eat healthy. Maybe they don't smoke, right? So all of that might be true. So true, I can take that, but, I always go back to the French, because the French drank And they're still around, otherwise known as the French paradox. So what's happening with the French? I want to know, because I want to have that lifestyle. And the authors of the article said, well, you know, interestingly enough, the French also have a diet that is low in saturated fat. Well, that in itself can lead to positive health outcomes. The authors of the article also said, you know, there are no experimental studies. That is, nobody has been recruited to drink or not drink and see who kills over dead first. That would be unethical. So the implications, the methodological implications in the alcohol studies are also present in intervention studies. Is there another explanation, right? So when we are doing interventions, what else is happening in people's lives that we cannot account for? And in fact, are we measuring what we set out to measure? Is that accurate? If we said that we are doing an intervention, are we tracking the fidelity of the intervention? Because if we are not, well, then we can't say if it's working or not. And are we using the multi-site randomized control trials? That is, are we doing the same intervention in different geographical locations, and people are put into either group, either the intervention group or the non-intervention group, but everything else, or as much as possible, so their ethnicity, race, and gender are equal across the groups. Because if we are not trying to do that, then it's really hard to account for other things that are happening in people's lives. The same is true for MI studies, right? We're here to talk about MI. So why am I talking about alcohol? That's just, you know, I'm going to get off my soapbox with alcohol now and talk about MI. The same issues are present in MI research. In fact, Bill Miller, last summer at the International Conference on MI, was talking about the fact that if you look at MI articles, you're going to find evidence that is kind of contradictory. Has anybody in this room experienced that, where you read a study and it's like, oh, it works, yay, and then you learn another study, it's like, oh, it doesn't work, oh, you know, and you're just going back and forth, and it's really confusing, right? So he said, what is happening? What might be happening in MI research that can cause that? Well, he said, you know, are we tracking fidelity? If somebody said, I'm doing MI, but they don't try to track it at all, well, we don't know, right? And if we are tracking fidelity, is it MI? If we are trying to measure MI, is it really MI? Is the sample big enough, right? Because if we only have 10 people in the study, it's really hard to see any meaningful changes. Is the comprehension of the people who designed the study of what MI is that accurate? Because let's say that somebody comes up with a study, says we're going to be doing MI, we are going to track MI, people are doing MI, but what they think MI is that we kick people in the shins repeatedly until they do what we want them to do. Well, that's not MI, right? And the last point was, you know, if we are doing MI, is the method of doing MI true to the spirit of MI? Or are we trying to put MI in a manual and have the interventionists just follow through the manual? Because that's not in accordance with the spirit of MI. And then he came to the point where he talked about the spectacular failures, where the studies were really well designed, they were doing MI, they were tracking MI, it was a multi-site randomized control study, and nothing happened. I mean, like nothing happened, you know, there was no difference. So Bill said, what is going on? What is happening? So let's take a look at a couple of those studies, and I'm just going to throw a new one in there for fun and see what's going on. So the Carroll et al. 2006 study was comparing two groups. One group, they added MI to the intake process. The second group, it was just intake as usual. And they wanted to see, will there be a difference in attendance of participants after the intake? And will there be a decrease in substance use. Great study, was done at 5 sites on the east and the west coast of the United States, had 423 clients, a bunch of clinicians were trained in MI, fidelity was tracked, they were in fact using MI. Let's see what they find out. There was better retention, but no difference in substance use. Now, as a researcher, I'm like, oh, this is interesting, right? What happened there? Like, so it's good that attendance is good, right? We, of course, want our clients to come in and see us, but it's kind of interesting that MI was developed in the field of substance use, but there was no difference in substance use between the groups. So that's kind of curious. As a practitioner, I would look at this and I would say, ooh, you know, I guess it's not awful, right? Retention was okay, but there's still in the practitioner part of me that is feeling like I really wish that there was more oomph to it, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say if I'm going to go and try to figure out what MI is. Let's look at a different study. When Hughes et al. Was comparing the motivational enhancement therapy for pregnant substance users to treatment as usual. Great study. They were looking again at retention and a decrease in substance use. Very well designed. Was done at 4 sites. 200 clients attended sessions. They tracked MI fidelity. They were indeed using MI. What was the outcome of the study? No difference in attendance and no difference in substance use overall, except when you would look at the individual sites, then you could see some difference. Again, as a researcher, I'm interested and curious to figure out what was happening at those individual sites. As a practitioner, I feel a little deflated. I feel a little confused, right? As a practitioner, if I need to devote time and money to figure out what MI is, and I see this as an outcome, I don't know if I would do that, right? It's kind of, it's leaving me feel a little confused. Now let's look at another study. Now in this study, I was the interventionist. I was the MI interventionist in the study. So it's near and dear to my heart. It was the Pennsylvania adolescent smoking study where we looked at 5 sessions of MI and compared it to 5 sessions of structured brief advice to see if there would be any change in adolescent smoking behavior. It was done at 3 sites, a bunch of clients, and my training was brutal. It was done by Alan Zukov, so it was like MI all the time, wake up in the middle of the night, can you do MI when you're still groggy? That's the only way that you can pass, right? So let's look at the result of this study. Oh, yeah, and we, in fact, were doing MI, just to kind of make it clear. The MI condition participants were 60% less likely to try to quit smoking. They were all, and also 40% of them cut back more than the SBA group. But let me come back to the first point, and that is they were 60% less likely to quit smoking. Now, I have a very biased opinion, right? I was in the room with these kids. I had a conversation with them about their smoking. And to me, this is really surprising. And in fact, I have some quotes from them that I'd like to share with you. This young lady said, I had my niece and my nephew, and I don't smoke in front of them. Like, I don't want to be no bad influence on them at all. And I would never put myself in that situation like that. A young man said, I was just like, it's just never going to end. Just like, it's never going to end if I don't just stop. So I was like, you know what? I quit. And another young man said, 6 months from now, if things is going to continue going well, then 6 months from now, I'll be done all that I wanted to do. Like, I'll be stopped smoking. My girl, she'll know how I feel about her, and I will understand more of her. Couldn't get no better. These statements to me are full of change talk about changing smoking, about quitting smoking. So when I see that the MI condition participants were 60% less likely to try quitting smoking, I am confused. And I'm really interested, what else was happening in this kid's lives at that point? What else was influencing the outcomes that we were measuring? And was the outcomes that we were seeing, were they an accurate representation of the client's experience with MI in their smoking? And Bill, he tried to make sense of the findings, right? He said, another piece that I would like to share before I go on to Bill, and that is just to kind of add another layer. In a meta-analysis in 2010, these lovely people looked at a bunch of MI studies, and they said, you know, MI performs better than treatment as usual. Now here's the catch. All the studies that I just talked about were treatment as usual, and they did not perform better. So I'm really confused. What is going on in the world of MI research? Are we all mad here? As Cheshire Cat would have us believe. And Bill now had some answers. He said, well, you know, treatment as usual is pretty good, especially because MI is pretty prolific right now. So it is starting to sip into treatment as usual. And you know, other studies that are looking at other things are having similar results. So maybe that's just the trend, that's what's happening right now. And he asked more questions that he answered. He said, what components of MI are most important? What factors influence therapist effectiveness with MI? Why does MI work in some sites but not others? Other populations for whom MI does not work, and why? And what is treatment as usual, folks, right? So with these questions, when I see these questions, for me, this is where the proverbial rubber meets the road when it comes to evidence-based practices, because the answers to these questions are going to get practitioners excited. If we know the answers to these questions, then we'll know how MI works, why MI works, and how we can make it effective. And until we do that, we are at risk of practitioners saying, oh, I don't know the answers to these questions, and there are other things that I can do, so maybe I won't use MI. And if practitioners are not invested in this, then to me, there is no evidence-based practice, because they can't come and talk to researchers, right? So how do we answer these questions? And more importantly, is the methodology that we're using to answer these questions, is it sufficient? And to me, the answer is no. And there are people out in the world who are far better suited to answer this question than me. So Merleau-Ponty, a social science philosopher, said, scientific texts cannot tell us anything about the subjective human experience. Amadeo Giorgi said, psychological research methodology is rooted in natural sciences that study objects, and thus it has failed us because it treats humans as objects. And Schutz said, positivism has ignored the rich subjective experience of the study participants. And so how do we enrich empirical research methodology to include these techniques? And the answer to me is obvious. We ask clients and clinicians about their experience with MI, especially with MI, because MI as a practice is a conversation, it's a dialogue, it is collaborative, it is other centered. So if we are using MI with our clients, if we're using the practice of MI to ask questions and engage people in a conversation in our practice, why would we not use the practice of MI in our research? Why would we not do that? And so I would like to talk about a study that I just did and see if I can show why it is important to have a conversation with the clients and clinicians to enrich our experience of MI and MI research. So the study that I did is Motivational Enhancement Group Intervention, or MEGI. It was done with high school students with emotional and behavioral and intellectual disabilities in high schools. It had 10 sessions to it. And what I was looking at was, would this intervention be effective in increasing students' vocational self-efficacy, vocational outcome expectations, self-realization, and autonomy? The good news is that it did. When I looked at my numbers, it came out that it did, except when I looked at vocational outcome expectations, what I found was that the more of the intervention the students had, the less likely it was that there was going to be an increase. Now that is really confusing to me. I would expect the opposite, right? So I ask, why? Why did that happen? And I can go to theory and I can say, well, adolescents are changing their minds all the time. They don't know what the heck they want to do anyway. It has nothing to do with my intervention. It's just what adolescents do. And I could do that. And everybody would say, oh, that kind of makes sense. But what I did instead is that I went to the students and I asked them. I asked them about their experience with MI. And I asked them about how it affected their understanding of themselves and how they see themselves and what they want to do after they're done with high school. So here's what they said. They said that there was a lot of conversations about uncertainty and needing to have a plan B. The young lady right here said it helped me learn more about what reality is. Being a professional singer isn't really reality. It can be, but like not everyone gets to do it, and it's really hard to achieve. And the other thing I wanted to be was an ultrasound technician, and that's more reality. That's my plan B. There are also conversations about how does one's disability impact the careers that they can have. This young man said, since I wanted to be a lawyer or a counselor, I found out that it's not easy. I have really hard time doing tests in high school, so it would be even harder for me to do tests to be a lawyer. And my dad kind of said that, so then I kind of started to look like, what would happen if I tried to do that? I started thinking, oh, I should take a chance because I get to go to college for free because I'm a foster kid. But then I kind of pulled back and was like, maybe I should just try counseling for a while and like see how that goes. There were also conversations about introspection and confidence. This young man said, my confidence level wasn't very high on the job I thought I wanted. I kind of realized that the job I wanted wasn't going to be a career I want to keep. I want to go into the military, but not for the rest of my life. I want to go do something else for the rest of my life. I want to go work in a brewery. I'm confident about that because I've done it before. Like I've worked with beer because I worked with my dad with it. It's just something that I've accumulated a passion for. So it's just really fun to do, and I thought that would be a lot better for me. There's also anxiety about how others' perception of disability affected the options that these kids have. This young lady said, and I'm also afraid, like whatever I want to do, like if I don't want to be a nail artist or a kindergarten teacher, if I want to do something else, that they won't allow me because of my disability. Because one of my old teachers said I wouldn't graduate or anything, or nobody would want me in there because of my disability. And there was a lot of frustration with the education system. One of the graduation requirements is their writing test, and I've been trying to pass it for like 4 years now, like multiple times a year, and I haven't passed it. And I just think it's kind of messed up. They don't look at you as a person, they just look at you as a number. You're like a piece of paper, you're not human. There's so many requirements for graduation. Personally, I think it's ridiculous, because what if you are really good at something and you don't graduate and you have good grades? This to me is not confusing it's inspiring. It is helping me understand what happened for these kids in the room. What I heard from all of these conversations is that when they were in a room with other kids and they engaged in these conversations, all of a sudden they felt very open and vulnerable and sensitive. And that has caused anxiety and uncertainty in their lives. All of a sudden they started to think and talk about things that they have not been allowed to before or have not had an opportunity to. And so what they wound up feeling is overwhelmed. And at the same time, while they were talking about being uncertain and anxious and overwhelmed, they were also saying things like, you know what, I've never considered that I can do something. And so I'm just going to work hard. I'm going to try to go and achieve my goal. And if I achieve it, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to say, look, I did it. And if I'm not able to, then I'm just, I'm going to keep trying. I'm not going to give up. This is not confusing or deflating. This is inspiring. And this explains to me why the more they had of these conversations, the more they felt uncertain and overwhelmed. And it's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that intervention was bad for them, right? This is not confusing. This is inspiring. So I also said, I said that we need to interview the clients and talk to the clients, but we also need to talk to the practitioners. And so I asked the teachers who were the interventionists in my study, I asked them about what was their experience with the students' outcome expectations as their result of the study. And this is what a teacher has shared with me. She said, we started the year off with an intellectual disability support class that I had, where they made posters of things that they saw in their futures, trying to get them thinking beyond high school, and they couldn't do it. It was kind of an eye-opener for me. I think that most of them cut out pictures of cars that they like to look at now, or things that they liked in the picture. They had lots of animals on their posters, and then trying to say, okay, tell me how that's related to your future. They couldn't do it. Like, they couldn't even name a career. I think out of my class of 25, I think there was probably 3 kids who could name a job in the future. But by the end of MEGI, all of them could name a job, like a job that they would want to do. I mean, it was cool to hear them at least say, this is what I want to do after high school. And they kind of started to talk about college and jobs. I really enjoyed seeing that change. It was drastic. This to me is not confusing. This to me is inspiring. A number, to me, cannot reflect the experience that we as humans have. Tests, assessment, questionnaires don't allow for self-reflection and elaboration. There's no space for it if the only options that are available to you are 1 through 5, right? And so, what is the point of research without human stories? And Alice said, what is the point of having a book if there are no pictures and conversations? So my question is, what is the point of my research without the power of human stories? And so I invite you, as practitioners and researchers and supervisors, to get curiouser and curiouser about how yours and your clients' experiences enrich MI research. I also invite you to jump down their rabbit hole of methodological multiplicity and to allow for the possibility and plausibility of something that right now may seem impossible and implausible. The questions that Bill asked can be answered by asking your clients and by reflecting on your own experiences. MI is not a monologue, and research is not a monologue. It is a dialogue among all of you as practitioners and clients and supervisors. If we set only one agenda, and that agenda is determined by only one group, At best, it's going to be deflating, and at worst, it can be oppressive. MI is a conversation that informs our knowledge and helps us create our own reality. To me, the dialogue is the most stringent test of any hypothesis about the human existence, because the people who live in this world are our best supporters and critics. And I would like to end with a quote by Paulo Freire about his analysis of dialogue. Here's what he says. He says, "The essence of dialogue is word. Within word, we find two dimensions, reflection and action, in such a radical interaction that if one is sacrificed, even in part, the other one immediately suffers. When a word is deprived of action, reflection automatically suffers and is turned into idle chatter. On the other hand, if action is emphasized exclusively, the word is converted into activism or action for action's sake. Human existence cannot be silent, nor can it be nourished by false words, but only with true words with which we transform the world. And consequently, no one can say a true word alone, nor can he say it for another person. The dialogue cannot happen between those who wish to name the world and those who deny them their right to speak. The dialogue cannot exist in the absence of profound love. The naming of the world, or the creation of knowledge, for which is an act of creation and recreation, is not possible if it is not infused with love. The dialogue cannot exist without humility. The naming of the world, through which we constantly recreate the world, cannot be an act of arrogance. It also requires intense faith in people. The faith in their power to make and remake, to create and recreate. It cannot exist without hope. Hope is rooted in human incompletion, from which we move out to constant search, a search which can be carried out only in communion with others. And finally, the dialogue cannot exist without critical thinking. The thinking which discerns an indivisible solidarity between the world and the people and admits of no dichotomy between them. And only the dialogue which requires critical thinking can generate critical thinking. So as a child who was taught to question authority in the world, as a student who was encouraged to seek out a variety of different ways of understanding the world, and as a practitioner who is always trying to make sense of her clients' experiences and help them create their own understanding of their lives, I will end with one last question to you, and that is why? Thank you.